Record. And welcome to chapter 13. We've only got a few to go. And I want to begin tonight by talking a little bit about our last big assignment other than our regular assignments. This is our instructional materials project, and I want to give a little bit more information about that. I also want to remind you all that our last test 3 is due tonight. So if you have not already taken test 3, it closes tonight at midnight. So here on my screen, I've opened up Canvas, and this is the set of instructions that go along with the instructional materials project. And let's just go over that a little bit before we dive into tonight's chapter. It says develop a non-reproducible instructional activity or game, something that's not a paper pencil activity or worksheet. So this is something interactive that you can do with the students in your future classroom or whatever setting you plan to work with students or children that you can use with a student in your field and or your future classroom. This could be a folder game or other type of activity. And then I've put a couple of 3 websites here that you can find activities if you don't have a lot of experience with this sort of thing, or you don't have any ideas that just come to the front of your mind. If you're not involved in a lot of education courses yet, you may want to look at some of these websites. There are tons of things on Pinterest. If you're deep into your education courses or your particular courses of your major, then you've already discovered these kinds of things. Teachers Pay Teachers. There's a website called My Folder Games, my FF Games, that stands for Folder Games. FF, I'm not sure what the 2 F's stand for, My FF Games. I think that's, I'm not sure what the 2 F's stand for. But anyway, that's a folder game website. And you can make lots and lots of games out of just, file folder, that's what it stands for. My File Folder Games, and just take a manila folder and you can open those up and have lots of games that you can make for your classroom. And those are great for center activities. And so I'm going to show you one of those here in a minute. I think one of the ones I'm going to show you is a folder game. Anyway, lots of those kinds of activities that you can just have a whole stack of for centers or for rainy day activities for kids, things like that. And all 3 of these sites, and I'm sure lots of others, have examples of games or activities that would be good for this particular assignment. You don't have to use a game from one of these sites. I've had students through the years who have had maybe their mom or their sister or their aunt or their best friend has been a teacher, or maybe has just been through the education program and has a lot of great ideas. And some people have just used those that they've gotten from a friend or a family member. These are just resources that illustrate examples of what the assignment requires. Then you need to develop a PowerPoint or a Prezi or Google Slides that tell about your presentation, that present ideas about your project or your game. And it has to include the following. Okay, the background information, the age, the level, the grade, and you know what, I'm going to take out this level of functioning because that always throws people. So we're just going to take that requirement out. So let me just edit that right now. I'm going to edit that requirement. Oops. I'm going to edit that requirement out. So where it says level of functioning, we're going to get rid of that because, like I say, that tends to confuse people. So level of functioning, we just want to know the age or grade level that you want to go with for your students. And the disability that you're kind of focusing on. So that's what we want to begin with. The age or grade level, the disability, what's your learning objective? What are you trying to teach? And then identify the TEKS or TEKS, however you want to pronounce that your activity supports, written in behavioral terms with 3 components included: the conditions, the behavior, and the mastery criteria. Example, when presented with X, the student will Y, and then Z, the number of times the student will do that. And if you're already into your education courses, you've seen behavioral objectives written in these terms. And if not, just look up behavioral objectives and you'll see examples of that online, or perhaps in a sample lesson plan. You'll see behavioral objectives or learning objectives, and you'll see how that's written. Then I want a description of the activity, including directions for making your activity or game, plus the source or sources that you used. If you've thought the activity up all on your own, then just say, this is something I made up, or I got from my mom or my sister, and put that person's name. Or if you got it off of one of these websites or another one, put that. It doesn't have to be a fancy source that you cite. Then the results, what are the outcomes of the activity related to your learning objective? What are some adaptations? Now, this is the key part of this assignment, because what I'm trying to get you to think about is how you can take activities that you would use in your general education classroom, that you would use with a typical 1st grade or a typical 8th grade or a typical PE class for 5th graders, or whatever it is that you're planning to teach, what you'd like to teach someday, and how you can adapt that activity to a child with a learning disability of some sort, or a disability, perhaps they've got a mobility disability. And how could you change that PE activity for a child with a mobility disability in 5th grade PE? Perhaps they have a learning disability and they don't know how to read yet, and you're teaching reading in the 3rd grade. How can you change that activity? What adaptations can you make for children who are having difficulty with that reading activity in the 3rd grade when everybody else is reading? Or let's say you're teaching 8th grade math and you have a student who's in your class with an intellectual disability, and they're not grasping those 8th grade math concepts yet, but they're in your 8th grade math class. What can you do to change that activity for your 8th grade math, for that student in your 8th grade math class, so that they can participate in that activity that you would use with your typical 8th graders? How can you change that activity so it's appropriate for the student who is in that class? That activity is designed for your typical students. And how can you change that activity so it's appropriate for a student with a disability? That's the objective of this activity. So I want it to be an activity that you can use with the population that you're hoping to teach, and then create adaptations for students who will have disabilities of some type. Now you can create it and you can change it around for more than one disability, or you can stick to just one disability if you're thinking of just one. And then we're going to look at your final product. I want to actually see a product. And then you're going to do a presentation of that activity on some sort of media, whether it's a YouTube channel or whether you're going to video yourself and send me that video. You're going to actually present that PowerPoint in some form or fashion, and then you're going to send that to me. So I'm going to see all of you in a 5-minute, 6-minute, 8-minute presentation as you deliver that PowerPoint to me and then show me whatever your activity is. So you are going to create an activity. The total package is going to be worth 100 points. So you're going to put together these steps. You're going to present, you're going to submit that PowerPoint on Canvas, but then you're also going to submit to me your presentation, whether it's on your YouTube channel or it's on a video clip, or some other means of submission, doesn't matter to me. But you have to submit both of those things. You've got to submit your PowerPoint presentation through Canvas, and then through email or some other means, a link to your presentation. You've got to submit to me your presentation. And through that presentation, I'm going to see your final product. So it's got to be something that you can show me through video means. If you only submit the PowerPoint presentation to me, you'll only get a small portion of the credit for this. The final product is worth 30 points. The presentation is worth 20. And so if you only do the PowerPoint, the maximum you could get would be 50 points of the 100. So you're only going to get half of the total if I don't see a product or a presentation. I've got to see all of that in order to get the maximum credit for this particular assignment. So it's worth a lot of points. It's worth the same as a test. You're going to want to do your very best on this, and hopefully be thinking along the way of how you can alter and adapt a lot of your assignments when you become a teacher, or if you're going to be doing something else in your career. Think outside the box of how you can change other activities that you might be doing with a typical learner, the way you can adjust those for people who have disabilities that you might run into in your career. So I had a young lady a few years ago who was going to she was going to be working in a drug treatment center. That was her career goal, and so she adjusted this for working with young adults in a drug treatment center. I've had a number of people who have gone through this class who want to work in hospital settings as child life specialists. And you can adjust this activity for those settings as well, as long as you keep in mind that the person that you're dealing with will have a disability beyond just their healthcare needs. Think about it as though they have one of the disabilities that we've talked about this semester. I've had a number of kinesiology majors who put the lens of physical activities on this assignment. And then, of course, all of my general education majors look at it with the lens of academics. So there's lots of different ways to look at this assignment. And hopefully you've learned a lot this semester about disabilities and how you, as a general education instructor, if that's your career goal, can make adaptations to assignments all along the way that will be meaningful to students who have disabilities. And you can make those adjustments to whatever you happen to be teaching, so that the exercises that you do in your class will be creative and will have worth to all students, regardless of the impairments or disabilities that they might come to you with. So if you have any questions about this particular assignment, or you want to run something by me, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to discuss it further with any of you. But this is a multifaceted assignment. It will be due that last week or so of the semester. I can't remember exactly what the due date is, but that's that. Now, let's see. I will share again, and we'll look at chapter 13 tonight. And chapter 13 has to do with early intervention. And I think I'll just share my whole screen tonight. All right. Students who are at risk, and we'll talk about early identification of those students and early intervention. So what is the history of at-risk conditions? Well, this was a term that we began to use in the 1960s. when people began to think about the importance of environment on the development of humans. And in 1965, Head Start programs began. And these were programs for children who were 4 years old. So back in the 1960s, kindergarten was not widely available in schools. It was in some, but oftentimes kindergarten was just a private program. I didn't go to kindergarten. It was not available in my public school. I didn't start school till first grade. But I started school actually in 1965 as a first grader who was 5 years old. And at that time, my parents paid a fee of like $200, I think it was, for me to start school a little bit early because I wasn't 6 until a little further into September. I didn't make that September 1st deadline. And so my parents paid a tuition fee for me to start school a little bit early as a 5-year-old, so I wouldn't have to wait that whole year. They didn't want to pay a monthly fee for me to go to kindergarten the year before. And so they started me as a 5-year-old in first grade. But it was very common for people to pay for private kindergarten back then, but widespread public kindergarten was not the case until a little bit later. But Head Start programs did begin then. It was during the Johnson administration that a lot of education measures were put into law, and people began to be concerned, and things started to happen in the legislature about kids who might have disadvantage and what we could do to help promote healthier lifestyles for those children at home, and what we could do in a public school setting that would help those children get ahead. And obviously Head Start was one of those. So Head Start was for children who were 4 and 5 who could go ahead and start school and get that, that running start, so to speak, in their education. In the 1980s, the term at risk came into use in educational policy and in programs. And then in 1994, what we call Early Head Start was created. And this is where children who were 3 were then included in Head Start programs. Now, for Head Start, you have to qualify economically. There's an economic requirement for inclusion in either Head Start or Early Head Start. So an individual under the age of 3 who would be likely to experience a substantial developmental delay if early intervention services are not provided is the definition of at risk. And preschoolers aged 3 to 5 who are entitled to special education services, if they have developmental delays in physical, cognitive, communication, social, emotional, or adaptive development, are also considered at risk. So what are some of the conditions of established risk? Well, here's a list. Chromosomal abnormalities, and we've talked some about those in the last few weeks. Things that occur before birth, certainly in the earliest stages of fetal development, is when chromosomal abnormalities occur. Genetic disorders, which we've also talked about in recent weeks. Severe sensory impairment, that would be deafness or blindness or variations leading up to total deafness or blindness. Metabolic disorders, disturbed nervous system development, fetal alcohol syndrome, and severe attachment disorders. Some more that are of biological medical risk would be low birth weight, intraventricular hemorrhage at birth, chronic lung disease, and then this kind of fuzzy one that we call failure to thrive. Babies that just have difficulty all the way around and we're not sure exactly what's going on with them physically, but they have difficulty with their breathing, with their heart rate, with just general development and some of those milestones. So what are some common markers of environmental risk? Well, we've got parental substance abuse, family instability, poverty, homelessness, violence in the home, teen pregnancy, child abuse, neglect, school factors, English as a second language. And your textbook goes into some detail about all of these. So what are some protective factors, things that keep children from being considered at risk, that help them develop resiliency to overcome those risk factors? Well, they include a child's temperament, high self-esteem, some school competence, feeling good about themselves and what they can accomplish when they get to school, good emotional relationships with at least one of their parents, and this sense of perceived social support. So all of those are things that can help children establish this sense of resiliency. Some additional ones are good health, above average intelligence, hobbies or interests, good peer relationships, an easy temperament, positive disposition, active coping skills, a positive self-esteem, good social skills, this internal locus of control, and balance between seeking help and autonomy. So children that have better self-esteem are going to do better with these protective factors in place. So how do we identify toddlers who are at risk? Well, many different identification techniques and criteria are used throughout different states. Differences in chronological age and actual performance level can be expressed as a percentage. So we look at kiddos and we see how they compare to other kids and what we would expect from their level of development. So if you're 4 years old and you haven't met those 4-year-old milestones, then we would see that as a percentage, and you could be determined as at risk based upon your lack of development of those typical milestones. A performance at a specified number of months or a standard deviation below that age mean, or what we would expect to be the mid-level of expectation of where a child would be developmentally. Sometimes we do developmental assessments. There's one called the Battelle Developmental Inventory that's pretty common. It assesses children's physical development, their communication, their cognition or their intellect, their social or emotional development, and their adaptive skills. Sometimes we do individually administered screening assessments with children. Sometimes we look at their behavior through individually administered measurements. We look at how compliant they are, how antisocial they might be, what their behavior patterns are with some of those measurements. We look at their early reading skills. Now, we don't expect preschoolers to read, but we do expect them to start learning letter names and that sound association. We look at their vocabulary, how many words can they speak? What is their fluency? There are some reading assessments that we look at with young children. One is called the DIBELS. Once you get into schools, you may become very familiar with DIBELS. It's an early reading screening. It helps to identify students who are at risk for reading failure. There's another one called the Early Reading Diagnostic Assessment. Oftentimes we do these with our kindergartners and first graders to see how far along they are with their ability for those early reading skills like letter naming, things like that. And, it's amazing how many young children come to school already knowing their alphabet. Children who are at risk usually come to school without a lot of alphabet knowledge, without a lot of letter word association, letter sound association. There's one called the Pre-Reading Inventory of Phonological Awareness, where we listen to see how children understand rhyming words. Children who have not had a lot of books read to them don't have a lot of this kind of awareness. Children who've been read books like The Cat in the Hat and Green Eggs and Ham and lots of rhyming kinds of books latch onto that and have a good association of these kinds of words, breaking things into syllables and alliteration, sound isolation, and they just really latch onto phonics pretty readily, whereas children who have not had a lot of that experience with books seem to lag in this area. So what should children at risk actually be taught? Well, general education content is what we want. Some additional language and literacy skills. So lots of exposure to books and to words. Lots of story time. Lots of imaginary kinds of opportunities. Math skills, counting, number, word association, associating objects with numbers. This is 4 and this is 4 objects. Social and behavioral control, getting along with their table mates, learning how to sit on the square on the carpet, learning how to follow instructions, learning how to walk in a line, sit in your spot, keep your hands to yourself, all of those kinds of things that are part of the social norms of a classroom. Additionally, we oftentimes want to see the family involvement with very young children and see what the family dynamic looks like. How much opportunity is there for the skills that children will learn in an early childhood classroom actually bleed over into the home setting, so that the family can carry on the things that are being learned in the home situation. We've talked a lot about the IEP this semester, and for young children who are birth through 3, we call that an IFSP. That's an individual family service plan, because up to 3 years of age, we really involve the family in that. They're an integral part of what we do for young children who are at risk or who have disabilities. We want to use what's called universal design for learning that allows children to acquire and demonstrate knowledge in multiple ways. And this is really UDL is really what we wanted to do with all students. And that's make opportunities for kids to express their learning in lots of different ways. We want to make lots of opportunities for learning and for expressing learning for kids available to them, and not just thinking in those singular kinds of ways of teaching or of expressing a concept. We want to broaden that so kids have lots of ways of accessing learning in the classroom, whether it be through visual means or auditory means, or expressing themselves through words or pictures or sound or whatever that might be. We want to establish progressive levels of prevention. And so whatever means that takes, whether or not we work with the family at progressive levels to help what's going on in the home, or perhaps in the daycare setting, we can work to whatever level we need to provide those supports to help the child. Plan for shared storybook reading. lots of opportunities for that. Maybe we need to send books home. Sometimes we need to plan for helping family members improve their reading abilities. So sometimes this stretches into supporting other people in the home with their learning objectives. And we want to use positive behavior supports rather than punitive types of behavior management. We want to look at not only supporting children through positive means, but modeling that for the families that we're dealing with. So what is prevention? Well, it's an outcome of the process of intervention. And there are three types of prevention that we talk about in this chapter. The first one, our primary one, is to prevent harm. We always want to prevent harm from occurring first and foremost. But if we can't prevent it, if it's already occurring, then we want to reverse it. So that's our secondary approach. We want to reverse harm when we can. And then our third or tertiary type of prevention is to reduce harm. If we can't prevent it and we can't reverse it, then we want to reduce it. And that's why with our young children and really with any child along the spectrum, we need to include family involvement, because children spend just a portion of their day with us, and then they are going to go home to a family. And with our at-risk population, oftentimes the problem is much bigger than the child who has some of these factors going on. It mushrooms into the home setting. So it does require collaboration with others. Oftentimes the family that we're dealing with has layers of support from other agencies in the community, and it will require us to work with other entities as well. And so we need to remember these three types of prevention and where we fit in along this continuum, particularly when we're working with populations in poverty. Oftentimes there's just not a support system there where the families of children have ever been taught ways of parenting appropriately. And so sometimes we have to back up to those very essential steps of how to parent well. And that's how we begin the building blocks of helping the child himself, is by helping the parents parent in a better way. So what are some considerations for the home environment? Well, skills should be taught in natural environments. We've got to work with families in the situations and the circumstances that they find themselves. So whether that's the home or the park or the daycare center or a store somewhere in the community, that's the best place to teach, is in the natural environment. Interactions should always be prompt, sensitive, responsive, and supportive. So we don't want to be condescending or punitive toward families or other people who may be working with the child. We want to arrange the home to encourage frequent interactions with responsive adults and a variety of play materials. We want it to be organized, engaging, developmentally appropriate. Practices need to be used at all times with appropriate activities and materials on display. We want to consistently follow visual schedules with children and with families. We want to teach rules, rituals, and routines, and be respectful of those things that are already in practice in the home. What we also have to remember is that oftentimes the family members of the children that we're working with may, in fact, have disabilities themselves. And so we've got to be aware of that and respectful of that. But sometimes those individuals need some of the very same tools that the children need that we're working with. And so that has to be something that we're very cognizant of. So what type of instructional technology can be used? Well, sometimes children who are at risk really thrive with some extra computer time. It may not be something that they have in the home setting. So internet access is important. Is that something that that's even available in the home setting? We want to use computers for word processing, as research tools or for problem solving, not just for drill and practice. A computer may not even be available at home. And so particularly with, well, these days, everybody has a cell phone, and a cell phone is in fact a tiny computer. It seems like even people in dire straits of poverty have a cell phone, a smartphone even. And so we want to teach children to use those things for more than just the games that are oftentimes the primary use for those in the home setting. We want to teach them to use those tiny computers for everything that's possible to use them for. And then of course, to translate all of that, transfer all of that in the school setting. So what are some considerations for the general ed teacher? That may be most of you when you find yourselves in a school setting with children who are at risk. Well, you want to collaborate with the special educator, with parents and other staff members. You want to use the functional behavioral assessment, where we take a look at how a child is actually behaving and then do an analysis of that behavior. What's motivating the child? What are the consequences that they're receiving from the behavior? But what is it that they're seeking with their behavior? We want to put their some positive behavior supports in place. We want to deliver direct instruction. We want to give social skills instruction, make sure that they understand the social setting that they're working within, and how to appropriately deal with social constructs. And then sometimes applied behavior analysis techniques that we talked about a couple of weeks ago with our autism chapter. We want to provide extra exposure to books and shared reading experiences. That's one of the most basic, but yet one of the most valuable things that we can do is expose children to books and reading. Increase engaged learning time. And if we can just continue to have that time grow and grow and grow over the time that we have children with us. And provide many language experiences. Words and language are the pathways to intelligence and to wider experiences in the world. And the more opportunities we can provide with language and reading and books, the better off children will be. So I believe that's my last slide. It is. And so there's only a couple of you tonight, but if we have any questions, I'll take those now. And if not, that's it for our evening. Anybody?
I'm good, ma'am.
Okay. Destiny, anything from you?
No, ma'am.
Okay, well then we're done for tonight. That was short and sweet, wasn't it? Thank y'all for tuning in.
No problem. Thank you. Good night, ma'am.
You bet.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, y'all. We'll see ya.